Hello, I'm Pallister-Wilkins, an assistant professor at the University of Amsterdam in political science, and I've been invited to comment on this amazing data visualization put together by the Spreading Data team, and I want to thank them for this invitation. Because as someone who works at the intersection of borders, mobility, and health, I think this visualization is just fascinating. And the first thing that I find striking from the visualization of the data is the speed with which restrictions are imposed. The appearance of huge blocks of red suggests to me the heightened forms of mobility, connectivity, and speed that link many parts of our world today. Speed and connectivity that, when faced with a global pandemic, are inverted into shutdowns and closures. But what I am most struck by, and this builds on my first point about connectivity, is how, from the data visualization, it appears that many oceanic countries remain open. I want to focus on that and unpack it a little bit more. To me, this points to the histories and current socioeconomic and political relations of these nations. These are countries, islands. We're talking about islands. And putting aside the sort of simplistic arguments that we've seen surrounding New Zealand's success in fighting COVID-19 being related to its island geography, you would think these island nations can more easily impose border restrictions. But in many instances, we can see from the visualization that they have chosen not to. Oceania is a constructed name for a conglomeration of other places: Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia. It is defined by ocean and often known as the Sea of Islands. It is a region that has suffered at the hands of pandemics in the past, a region that has seen large numbers of its indigenous communities wiped out by viruses brought by colonialists, its people blackbirded into forms of enslavement that helped build the wealth of settler colonies in what we now call Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii, and parts of South America. Historically, movement of people in this oceanic space were regularly subjected to quarantines to prevent the transmission and importation of deadly diseases. However, why today, under COVID-19, are they, according to this data, open? In pre-corona times, mobility between and across this oceanic space structured the historic, sociocultural, and economic relations between Pacifica and oceanic peoples. And those connections remain and have been made more vital by historical relations of colonialism and extractive capitalism that continue into the present. Traditional economies and ways of living have been decimated by the destruction of local farming and extraction of natural resources. Public health is poor due to the importation of high calorific corn oil and sugar-laden foods, while health systems for the most part are under-resourced. As a result, many nations are reliant on these poor food imports and the health systems of larger, wealthier neighbors. Their economies are tied in relations of dependency to large settler colonies such as Australia, Aotearoa New Zealand, and the USA. Mobility across and through the oceanic space is mediated by transit hubs located in large cities such as Sydney, Brisbane, and Auckland. Mobility between these countries then is vital to the human security needs of the islands. Therefore, I would like to see a greater breakdown of the border restriction data for Oceania, to see what the data tells us about these human and resource connections. From my own preliminary research of oceanic governments' border restrictions and personal knowledge of Kiwi border policies, these policies are suggestive of many of the necessary life-giving connections between, for example, a large Pacifica diaspora across Oceania, wherein Auckland is the largest Polynesian city in the world. These policies and the connections across the Sea of Islands that they facilitate also appear to show, importantly, who is allowed to move, so certain Pacific Islanders, Tongans, Samoans, where they are allowed to move between islands, often positioned along hierarchies of wealth, and why they are allowed to move. So family reasons, family relations, health conditions requiring treatment, and necessary employment. So moving forward, mapping the intricacies and intimacies of these connections through the aggregation of specific border restriction data would be a great next step.